So we'll call the CalFRN board meeting for October the 11th to order. Roll call. Susie Oyeranda Curtis. Here. Patrick Mellon's here. Mr. Lee from here. Oh. That Lee. This Lee. Sorry. Jeff Hunter. Absent. Sheriff Jim Melee. Chief Scott Howland.
Here.
Chief Truanich.
Here.
Chief Kevin Guerrero. Bill Hartley.
Here.
Barry Fraser.
Present.
Adelita Zendejas.
Here.
And Mr. Jeff Lee. Here. And Jeff Hunter is online. Okay, first order of business is approval of the minutes from our August meeting. Are there any corrections? Mr. Lee?
Yeah, I spoke to Ferdinand, who was present on the board last time, and he just wanted to clarify that his note on page 3 was, he was really asking about, for Caltrans, we're extended primary users, and that we should be at a lower rate than the primary users.
That is something we will have to confer with AT&T on.
Okay.
But we will make that correction.
Thank you.
Okay, with that correction, are there any other corrections? We'll entertain a motion to approve.
I move to approve the minutes.
Okay, motion by Mr. Fraser. Is there a second?
I second.
Okay, second by Adelina Zendejas. All those in favor say aye.
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 Just roll.
You need a roll call vote on that? No.
Okay, so we have ayes. Any opposed?
I'll abstain, I wasn't here.
Okay, we have one abstention. 2 abstentions. Okay, moving on to the State Plan Technical Advisory Group update by Mr. Fraser.
Well, thank you, Pat. I really don't have a lot to say. Most of what we've done, Budge will give you an update on in just a minute. But I did want to say that Cal OES staff did a remarkable job of managing 3 review teams of 8 to 10 people each. We ran a lot of reviews. It was a very complicated process, and it went pretty much flawlessly. We got, I think 22 or so responses from our review team on the evaluations, which I think is a great number. I just want to thank the CalFRN team for their work and for a very successful evaluation. But I'll leave all the details to Budge, and he can walk us through exactly how the process worked and what the outcomes were.
Okay, thank you, Barry. Okay, moving on to item number 4, overview of the California State Plan Review.
All right, so for those of you in the audience, there are some hard copies of the slide deck. We'll have those posted on our website today. The board members all have a copy, and of course it'll be on the board. Oh, there we go. Perfect. All right, so this will be what we're going to cover. I'll cover an overview of the process we went through. Obviously, we'll talk about the results. We also had a separate review conducted by subject matter experts. We'll talk about some of that, and then we'll discuss our options and next steps. No. So this slide was briefed the previous time at the board. So the next couple of slides contain a summary of what we, as the state of California, we're looking for in this plan. These bullets are based on feedback that we got from the stakeholders throughout the state as we went and did our outreach meetings, as well as the questions and answers that went back and forth between us and AT&T and FirstNet. And so these were the items that we kind of zeroed in on as things we were looking for in the plan. So there's a number of them here. I'm not going to read each one of those to you. One of the most important things we were looking at is to get our comments back to our questions. And we were able to send those out to anyone who asked a question. Those should have been received yesterday. You should have gotten an email on them. So the next slide talks about more of those objectives that we were looking for. I'm going to go through these in detail and provide an overview based on the subject matter experts of how well these were addressed in the plan. So I'm not going to cover them in a lot of detail now. The next slide. This is what we did to review the state plan. So we put together a technical advisory group. As Barry said, there were 22 members on that group. Some of the members were on multiple areas, but they were broken up into 3 groups. And they focused on reviewing the information that was in the portal. And the portal updates were delivered by FirstNet on the 19th of September. We then got a letter from AT&T that clarified their offer to us. That was deposited in the portal on the 21st. The answers to the comments came back to us on the 22nd. Those were sent out to the evaluation team as well. And then we received an official notice to the governor starting this 90-day clock, and that came in on the 29th of September. All of that documentation was what was reviewed in this analysis that we're going to go through now. And then I'll talk a little bit after that about the subject matter analysis and how that was a little bit different. So next slide. So we developed evaluation topics that were based on the outreach comments and the priorities that were identified at those meetings. And we assigned members to each group. We got a cross of disciplines, fire, law, EMS, and really some IT type folks as well, because this is a heavy, data overview and data plan. So they were included in the group. And then we assigned scorecards using criteria as it exceeds our expectations, meets our expectations, or does not meet. And we assigned scores to those. The scores were submitted, tallied, and then we weighted them based on what we learned was most important when we went and did our outreach meetings. So that's how we did the evaluation. The next slide. These are the same groupings that we talked about at all the stakeholder meetings, so these little bubble charts should look familiar. Group A focused on coverage and deployment, the phases of deployment, and then rural, tribal, and deployables were all in that coverage group. The next group looked at network resiliency and security, and the final group took a look at service plans and device and operations and local control and applications. So that's how we grouped these areas, and then we came up with a number of criteria in each of these groups. So go to the next slide, please. This scorecard is hard to see, but we just wanted to give you a sense of what the tool looked like to the evaluators. They were given a scorecard, it had all the criteria on it, and then they could select from a drop-down the score that they were assigned. And then we asked them if it did not meet the needs of California to put a comment in and tell us what it would take to meet that need. Because obviously, we want to be able to provide some feedback on what it would take to get a passing score if in fact what was submitted did not pass. So the next few slides talk about the categories that we had in each of the groups. So Group A, we broke up coverage into all the important elements, and then each category contained this last bullet, which was level of detail. And essentially we were asking, was what was delivered to you via all the information that was provided enough for you to make an analysis? And we asked that in each of the groups. The next group was network, and again we broke those down into the major categories based on the feedback of the stakeholders. And the final group, you see what we were looking for in service plans and evaluation topics. So rather than go through and read all those to you and line by line, we'd probably all go to sleep in about 5 minutes. We'll provide that detail to you so you know exactly what we were looking for. The next slide, this is how we determine the weightings. So when we did our survey and we reached out to the stakeholders, we asked them to tell us what was most important. And all the categories that you see in the chart were available to choose from. And they ranked their top 3 or top 5, and then from that we derived what was most important to the stakeholders. You see coverage dominates. 61% of the folks picked a category related to coverage as being most important. So we took these weightings, 61% assigned to coverage, service plans 25%, and network 14%, and then we weighted the results. Okay? So we sent all this data off to the evaluation team. We gave them an ample amount of time, I think 3 days, to do the review. And we tried to structure it in a way that they could do that. And they were able to read through the comments and look at the data in the portal. They had all set aside time in their schedule, some even coming from hunting and fishing trips, as I see Matthew in the audience there, to do the evaluation. And we got a lot of feedback, and we prepped them ahead of time to help them understand what the categories were. So the next slide, what we did, remember when I said if they selected does not meet, we encouraged them to submit a comment. We got about 160 comments back from the 22 evaluators. So on each of these next slides, we've picked some representative comments that kind of give some feedback on what they were seeing in the plan. We got a lot of bullets and comments similar to what you see on this slide. Plan doesn't clearly articulate existing coverage gaps, omits measured speeds in rural counties and regions where coverage and capacity will be needed for the most common natural disasters. So there was a lot of information like that where they just weren't given enough data to make an appropriate analysis. So these next couple of slides, we picked the ones that were representative of the comments that were given to us. So you've got those in front of you. I encourage you to read through them. We have more available, more comments. The next slide talks about, from the network resiliency and security perspective, some of the comments that we had there. And really, you know, you can see from the comments, there was a good feedback in every single category. All right, the next slide talks about the service plans and devices and local control and applications. And again, same kind of thing. Some gaps in the information that was provided to allow the evaluators to make a clear decision. The next slide shows the results. So when we tallied up all the numbers, this is the bottom line. For coverage, the average score was a 1.9. Network, the average score was a 1.9. Service plans, the average score was a 2.2. And overall, when you weight those together with the percentages I talked about earlier, the overall weighted score is a 2.0. So that means that it's right in between meeting the need and not meeting the need. So there's some gaps. And we've got a slide toward the end of the deck that's going to talk about where those gaps are and how we think that gap can be closed. Next slide. LA-RICS, from the beginning, we've stated that it's important to have an integration plan for LA-RICS. So we had some LA-RICS members in our evaluation, and we also met with them separately to get some feedback on what they thought, from a state perspective, what we would be looking for in the plan. So this slide really highlights some of the things that we'd like to see in a state plan in order to go to you know, not even just a C, but maybe even a B grade on the overall. Because right now, if you kind of, you know, look at the numbers, they probably scored somewhere in the D range. So I had a couple of things just to highlight what these bullets say. Really, there's no guaranteed access to the network that's described in the plan. Priority and preemption are described, but that might just mean that you've got bars on your phone, not necessarily that you're actually able to get the data you need from the system. So that was one gap. A hardening of the network was another gap that was identified. And really the sense that from the beginning, public safety looked at this as a solution better than what we have today. Right, so the idea that would be that FirstNet is going to provide a clear and distinct advantage over the mobile data networks that are available to public safety responders today. And that these items here, if they were achieved, that would be the result. We'd get something better than we have today. So that's really what this slide is about. And really just looking for performance thresholds and accountability that must be in place in order to meet our needs. So that's the kind of the technical evaluation group, the technical advisory group. The next analysis we did was we asked some subject matter experts to look at this kind of more holistically, not necessarily checking boxes on a list to say, did you meet this, did you meet that, did you meet this, like you would in more of an RFP evaluation, but taking a step back and say, okay, what does this plan look like when you compare what our needs are as a state and as public safety responders in California? So we looked at, they looked at all the information available, so clarifications and responses to questions, critical infrastructure coverage maps, new site build maps, all the comment responses, and everything in the portal, and any other information that was available publicly or even in the portal to do the evaluation. And the subject matter experts on the next slide included not only folks with a wireless and telecommunications background, but also those that were experts in cybersecurity, and looking at the plan from a financial analysis as well as from public safety. So SAIC is the one who put together these next few slides. So if you see the little SME analysis on the bottom of the slide, this is their summary and analysis of all of this data that was given to us. And the goal was really to determine the impacts on California. What are the impacts to California if we were to opt in? So the next slide talks about the strengths that were in the plan and identifies what those are. So we had weekly meetings with AT&T after the draft plan was delivered to us, and through those meetings, we were able to discuss the number of cell sites. We're talking about new site builds and commitments over the next 5 years and 10 years after that. That was definitely a plus, and we really appreciate the information and work that AT&T put together in providing that. Also talked about a backup generator plan to support our critical infrastructure sites. Obviously, in light of even current events that are happening today, the need for this is very obvious. And then ongoing discussions to develop a deployment plan for coverage to meet the rural areas and where public safety responders need that coverage. Tribal areas were added onto the coverage maps to give an indication of what that coverage looks like, and really trying to clarify what unlimited data means and how it relates to priority with some other things. They documented the deployable request process, and they did address how to mitigate border interference. On the next slide, the strengths continue. They added some clarity on who's authorized, agency paid, subscriber paid, primary extended users. And now that information, which was only available in the portal, you can now get through the NASBO contract, so you can actually see the pricing publicly, which was good. And they added some information on bring your own device, and added some information on training and other things that would be part of the plan, and talked about how public safety apps would be starting to be certified through the labs that are in Boulder, Colorado. And they provided some clarity on their roadmap, and they talked about keeping the portal open through 2020 to help through the transition phase. So we thought those were all strengths. The next couple of slides, the SMEs talked about some of the weaknesses. So there's still some coverage shortfalls that are in there, and really a clear and definitive plan to address those coverage gaps. The coverage maps depict the entire state of California on an 8.5 by 11 type map generally. A little hard to get the granularity you need there based on tile size and some of the other parameters. So there's still some issues there. Really, this public safety grade requirement and the ability to meet the needs of public safety and hardening of the sites. And there was only a qualified intent to assimilate LA-RICS users, and didn't talk too much about the actual assets into the network. And we'll really see some gaps in the, they pointed out some gaps in the incident management tool and the local control and the access. Right now that's still under development, so it's a little difficult to describe that in detail, but we see that as a critical component. And it lacks some detail on satellite partner agencies, other carriers that you may have agreements with in the state of California. And then lastly, just some discussion about the security and encryption, and this next bullet, the meeting CGIS requirements and some of the security requirements that need to be part of the network. difficult to ascertain because the security that is called out in the portal is based on an AT&T proprietary security protocol that it's difficult to analyze because it's proprietary. And really, these last couple of bullets talk about how the SMEs pointed out that there was a commitment for a specific plan to address the coverage gaps that public safety responders have identified. And really, the big takeaway, true application interoperability, regardless of which network or device or carrier that app is riding on, the true ability for those apps to have interoperability. So that's an overview of the data that was submitted through the portal and all of that information. The next thing we asked them to do, the SMEs, we asked them to take a look at the responses that came back. So that we gave 687 comments to FirstNet. A number of them came back with just kind of thank you for the information or just a similar acknowledgement. Some pointed the users back to information that's in the portal, but the users that submitted the questions don't have access to the portal, so there's a little problem there if you point them to a place to get the answer that they can't see. About 95 of the questions talked about that. And then a good number of about half of the coverage comments use this standard language that you can see on the slide here. Rather than addressing the actual question, they just kind of pop this standard answer down. The next slide, if you go through and read all 687 responses, really reveals very little new information. We appreciate the effort that was put into those, but if you were wanting, we're used to an RFP process where you get an in-depth analysis on every single thing you ask for, and this process is not that. The responses were a little repetitive, and there was a lot of use of words like intends and welcomes and understands, and we were looking for words like commits and will and absolutely and guarantee. Little difference there. On the next slide, we talk about just there's really no metric in place so that we, the state, can measure progress or performance. All of that is handled by FirstNet. Since the contract is between AT&T and FirstNet, we as the state, there's really no direct metric into that, and no real means to enforce the terms or details of the proposed plan. Doesn't mention a lot of information about the LA-RICS simulation. Again, we talked about that before. There's 4 in-state FirstNet deployables that are planned for California, so that number's low. Each of those supports maybe 200 users. So if you start doing the math, you see very quickly that this won't meet the need for any large-scale type response. And finally, after a lot of work, and certainly thanks to Scott Andrews, who's in the room, for his efforts, we were able to actually send those comments out to all of those who asked the question and asked the questions. And like I said, you should have those in your inbox as of yesterday. And we've gotten about 100 people already that we know have opened and read the email because we're tracking that. So they are being read and looked at, so we appreciate the effort there. The next slide talks about, and we're going to get into this in a further slide as well, just the costly, risk-filled path for opting out and building our own radio access network as a state. And if you think about this next bullet, talks about AT&T's, we gathered the data to affirm that the coverage provided by AT&T today does not meet public safety needs everywhere. And so there's this known gap there. It'll be important to address that gap. Competition, we certainly know, will help generate other carriers that get involved with this. Is going to help generate the cost down and make a better product. And an opt-in decision by the state still means that each individual agency has to make that choice as to whether they're going to subscribe or not subscribe to the services. So we took all this data, the SME analysis, the technical advisory group analysis, and the next slide we as a state looked at what options are available to the state of California. And obviously this board and the technical advisory group have been deliberating on that. There's basically three options. Opt-in, meaning that the state would then be responsible to build the radio access network for, I'm sorry, opt-out, the state would be responsible to build the radio access network for the state of California. Opt-in, you go with the FirstNet solution and AT&T solution as it looks today. And this third decision, no decision. So what that looks like is the way that the law is written, if the governor does not make a decision to opt in or opt out by December 28th, then you opt in by default. So that's that last version there. So the next couple of slides, we're going to walk through, what we see as the challenges.
Can I just make a quick comment, Budge?
I think, yeah.
When I thanked Cal OES staff, I neglected to thank the review teams, and I wanted to go back and say thank you. So, several of the members of the teams are in the room here today. Hopefully, some are listening on the webcast. But I wanted to thank you all too for the great job that you did, because it did. You reminded me. We gave them this huge volume of information and said we need a decision in 3 days. We need the forms filled out in 3 days. And they really stepped up to the task, and I appreciate that. It helps us in the job that we have to do here on the board. I also wanted to just mention that we specifically did not ask the review teams to weigh in on whether the state should opt in or opt out. We strictly limited their evaluation to to the criteria on the evaluation forms and whether they felt the information that they were given did not meet or exceeded the criteria, the priorities for California. So the scores do not indicate that it's an opt-in or opt-out decision. It really indicates whether there's sufficient information in the plan that they reviewed. So but again, thank you all.
So if you go back one slide, Paul, I just want to mention too that no decision could be the course as of today, but obviously we're hoping that based on the feedback provided today at this board and maybe a recommendation that's made, that there's still the negotiations ongoing. So one of the slides we're going to cover are the major gaps that we see in the plan. So moving forward to the opt-out slide, we were delivered some numbers from NTIA on Friday is when we received those numbers, and they had details on what we, the state, would have to enter into in terms of a spectrum management lease agreement to build out a radio access network. Much of the data in that is proprietary and signed under non-disclosure terms. However, these high-level numbers we wanted to share because we think they're important so that everyone understands what the state would face in terms of liability and other metrics if they were to build out their own radio access network, if we were to build out our own radio access network. The first one talks about the number of subscriptions. So fast forward 25 years, at the end of the road, we have to have over 200,000 primary users on the network and an additional 100,000 extended primary users. These numbers are a little unrealistic because at 6 years, the numbers are close to this, and by the end of the 25-year period, they go even higher. So that's unrealistic because we don't even have that many responders in California. So this is a really challenging, daunting number for the state to achieve. In order to use the spectrum and that spectrum lease agreement, there are payments that have to be made back to NTIA over the 25-year life of the contract. It would total almost $3 billion in spectrum lease payments that would have to be paid back to NTIA. And if we get partially down the road, there's time metrics in there, but depending on where we were at in the process, if we were to say, okay, we're going to back out of this and no longer build the RAN and go with the FirstNet solution, then there's penalties that exceed over $15 billion if we decide that we're no longer going to build the network at some point in time. So, based on these numbers, and unless we could negotiate something different, this is a huge liability for the state to take on. And so at this point, we see opt-out as not really an option. The next slide talks about the challenges that we see in an opt-in decision. There's no guarantee that the sites are going to be built to support where we need coverage from a public safety perspective. There's intends, there's welcomes, there's a number of builds that are committed to, but exactly where those sites go, there's no guarantee they'll meet the need. They don't guarantee that the sites will be hardened in public safety grade. So if you've been watching the news and seen the impact of large disasters on cellular networks, you can see that essentially inside an impact area, the cellular network does not survive very well. So that's certainly a risk when you put public safety users on this network and they begin to rely on it, and then it's not available in a time of disaster. It doesn't guarantee that the applications will support interoperability between carriers. This is extremely important for California. We know that we have users on a variety of carriers today, and because of the coverage gaps that we know that exist, they will remain on those different carriers until the coverage gap is fixed. Well, in the interim, if there's an application that requires access to the FirstNet core, that application would not be interoperable and between the carriers. And this is a huge problem for us because we know even if you go forward 5 or 10 years, there will still be gaps in AT&T coverage that are filled by another carrier. And so there's a need for applications interoperability across all carriers and all systems. This is extremely important. There's no guarantee that the user portal is going to meet stakeholder needs. That's the primary interface between the customer and AT&T. And there's no guarantee that OES or any other agency is going to be able to influence that portal interface. And we'd like to see that guarantee. No guarantee of integration of LA-RICS equipment and users. That's just missing from the plan. And there's no guarantee for a suitable deployment plan. So what's guaranteed in the plan is 4 deployables. And if you do the math, that covers maybe 12 square miles. We have 163,000 square miles. If each deployable supports 200 users, and we have, according to them, 350,000 users, there's some real gaps there in the deployable plan, as well as the deployment timeline and the staging and all the other parts of that plan. So from the perspective of the evaluation we've completed, at this point, opt-in is not an option. So the next slide just talks about next steps. We'll continue to move forward and present all available and relevant information to the governor, and we're in the 90-day review period, which goes between now and December 28th. So I turn it back over to you, Pat.
Thank you, Budge. Do any of the board members have any questions?
Pat or Budge, why don't you provide perspective on why we felt the number of users or subscribers wasn't an accurate number?
Well, the numbers that we have of public safety responders, first responders in the state today is less than 200,000. Yet in year 6, they require more than 200,000 subscribers to the system. So even if you look at in the references that a user would have more than one device. Well, maybe they might have more than one device that they're personally paying for, but that the public agency is paying for is probably a little bit more restricted. And that also would assume that we had 100% coverage and 100% adoption by every single agency across the state. So the number of 200,000 users by year 6 is illusory. It's impossible to reach, let alone another 150,000 secondary responders. The other thing that is a huge concern to us was the spectrum use charges, particularly getting into year 6. is about $75 per month per device based on 300,000 devices. That's over and above the cost of building and operating and maintaining a system here in the state of California. So I think those numbers are extremely arbitrary and punitive. And then we are at a loss for understanding the basis of if at year 5 we decide to throw in the towel and realize that we cannot build a public safety broadband system in California. The penalty of $15 billion is without substance. I mean, there's no substantiation for that. It's a number that's been thrown out. When we inquired as to the basis for it, we were not given an answer. So it's a little disappointing. Chief?
Pat, a couple questions. First, from the standpoint, do we anticipate any additional clarification or information from FirstNet? Because it seems like there's a number of key critical issues that have been, brought out from our plan review. And I know when I'm working on projects and I have questions, we sit down with folks and really understand, what does this mean? What are we building? And, when you build a house, are we really putting a window here? And what kind of window are we putting here? And is it going to close? Is it going to lock? All the details that are pretty darn important when you're trying to build something. And in our case, trying to make a decision or make a recommendation to the governor as far as what's in the best interest of California public safety first responders and what's in the best interest of the state of California as far as financially when we address risk.
Well, we received these figures on Friday, late Friday, and so to really digest them, it's took us a day or two. So as of this morning, we have a lot of questions we do not have the answers to. We would certainly expect to have further discussions with NTIA and FirstNet as to how they came up, because I'm sure the questions from the governor is how do they come up with this number, and to say, well, that's proprietary, that's a secret between AT&T and FirstNet, is not an acceptable answer that I expect that the governor would allow us to walk away from. So I would hope that we would have an opportunity to continue those discussions, as well as some of the gaps in the coverage and in the the needs of California from AT&T. I think the last or previous slide showed the significant gaps that we see for interoperability and guaranteed interoperability for the 5 or 10 or 15 years that it's going to take for coverage to be improved to where it really supplies data coverage for public safety responders, for all public safety responders in California. So I'm hoping that we certainly intend to continue the discussions. I'm sure that we need to line up what we anticipate the questions are going to be from the governor. Plus, we know that there's going to be some that we cannot anticipate, but we want to be as prepared as we possibly can.
Because I think you mentioned interoperability. That's a really, really important issue to first responders, and I represent a statewide agency that currently uses multiple carriers to ensure I have the best coverage possible. I need to make sure that that is seamless as far as my ability to continue to operate and ensure that my units can talk to each other on that standpoint, and then to be able to interface with law enforcement agencies across the state, because we interface with 100% of law enforcement agencies across the state. And so I think, understanding and getting additional information as far as interoperability and the other issues that have been, raised as far as questions and clarification are really, really important as we're trying to provide information to the governor so the state of California can make the best decision possible.
Okay. Any other questions or comments from the board?
A couple of quick
Mr.
ones.
President.
I just want to echo what Scott just said, the importance, the critical importance of interoperability. For some of the agencies in BayRICS have contracts with all 4 of the major carriers, and would hope and intend and expect to keep contracts with all of the major carriers, and that really depends on interoperability and the ability to ensure that data transmission between carriers, between cores, is seamless. And so that, to me, is a critical aspect of this as well. My other comment was just a quick one, and it's, I have never yet seen a good definition of what a public safety user is on this system. And so I would hope that in the discussions going forward on the question of fees and cost and that type of thing, that we get some type of clarity on, you know, what that means. Because, you know, if you have two different entities with two different definitions, the numbers really become kind of meaningless. So I hope that we kind of are able to tighten that up and clarify exactly who is going to be a public safety user on the system.
Well, it's my understanding that the primary users would be police, fire, EMS, emergency management, and volunteers, you know, volunteer like reserve police officers, volunteer firefighters, they would be primary users. The extended primary users would be like your public works department, your public transportation, Caltrans, et cetera. And within the fee structure, even those that are extended primaries could have the priority and preemption, or, excuse me, the priority services on the system for an additional fee per month per device. Any other board members have any comments or questions?
Pat, I have one quick comment, and that is first, my appreciation to all the SMEs who contributed to reviewing these materials in an incredible timeline. I mean, it's phenomenal the amount of work that has gone into reviewing the response. And it has been so important, I believe, for first responders, the opportunity to comment. Just the number of comments alone shows how important this is to the first responder community. FirstNet at its core is about interoperability. And so I'm a little disappointed at, I guess, what I would perceive as somewhat generic answers to key questions around interoperability that I'm certainly hoping over the days and weeks to come we get some more clarity around so that we can have some confidence in terms of how we move forward.
Okay, thank you. So at this point, you know, this board needs to make a recommendation that we can at least pass on to Director Ghilarducci and ultimately to the governor, and that is to opt out, opt in, or make no recommendation at this time. So with that, I'll entertain a motion. If there's no motion, there's no vote.
You know, I would actually like to hear if there's public comment. I don't know if it's appropriate to not have public comment until after we've made our recommendation or not made our recommendation, but I actually would be interested to hear from the public. So
we will have a public comment section, but it is later, so I'll refer to council. You want to make that as a motion?
Yeah, I think I'd make a motion to move public comment to right now.
I second that motion.
I'll second.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
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 Is there any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, first step. Do you have the cards? Okay. Mr. David Wiedrich from Verizon. We have a.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. So I'm David Wiedrich. I lead our nationwide public safety solutions group with Verizon. And my public comment here, I understand I've got 3 minutes. First of all, I just want to say that, you know, it's our thoughts and prayers are with those affected by the fires that are happening right now, and certainly Napa, Sonoma, and Santa Rosa area. And we certainly salute and appreciate all the work that our first responders are doing, that we know Cal is heavily involved in, and Verizon is absolutely there to help the citizens and the first responders be able to work through this crisis. Verizon's position on this is we absolutely support an open and interoperable arrangement for our first responders for public safety. We absolutely supported a nationwide interoperable agreement for public safety. Verizon did not bid on the RFP. We've been asked that before. Why? Because we already had the nationwide spectrum and felt that it wasn't in our business model to commercialize spectrum for public safety. However, we've absolutely come out as of late and let people know that we are building a dedicated end-to-end private core for public safety, providing priority preemption, expanding our Band 14 device portfolio, making sure that we've got competitive rates, and that you can absolutely count on Verizon. We know it's important that a network needs to be hardened. We know that it's important that a network has the coverage that you're looking for. And we want to say this, that we've been asked the question, should California put out an RFP to consider its options, would Verizon respond? And the answer is yes. We want to make sure that that's clear. We believe that competitive environments are best for public safety, and we want to let you all know that you can absolutely continue to count on Verizon. We will work hard to earn the continued opportunity to be the preferred provider, but we believe that in a competitive environment, working together with carriers, especially at the application level, that is going to enable public safety to win and be able to realize the benefit of a interoperable arrangement. And therefore, that's why we're making this stance, making these investments on our end, and we're making it very publicly known that we will be complementary with FirstNet, but we're absolutely going to be competitive with AT&T. And I just want to thank you all the opportunity to state publicly that Verizon is someone you can absolutely count on for the state of California. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next up will be Mr. Darrell Parks.
Good afternoon. My name is Darrell Parks. I'm a lawyer from Tallahassee, Florida, the firm of Parks Law. And I wanted to say to you, at a minimum, California should conduct its own RFP to evaluate the alternatives to the first AT&T plan and learn whether other providers are willing to offer more comprehensive coverage of the state. Inadequate and incomplete coverage is a matter of life and death to first responders. And in a situation where they have an emergency, it cannot be a matter of convenience to AT&T that decides how this happens. AT&T has a history of redlining its network rollouts and overstating its service claims, especially in disadvantaged areas. California should think hard about entrusting its public safety communications to a company with this track record. Again, at a minimum, it should explore all available alternatives before committing the state to an AT&T solution. It should strive for the network that serves all Californians, not just those that is commercially convenient to AT&T to serve. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Parks. Next up will be Mr. Moore.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the time. Members of the board, thanks. My name is Chris Moore. I'm the retired chief of police from the city of San Jose. And I chaired the effort on behalf of the major city chiefs, on behalf of public safety nationwide, to get the spectrum so that we could have what is now turned out to be FirstNet. In addition to that, when I retired as chief of San Jose, I went to work for a company called Bravada. Some of you may have heard of that company. We are proposing nationwide also as an alternative to AT&T. That said, I'm going to put that hat aside and just put on my public safety hat, and that's this. Again, when this effort was started, it was because the carriers weren't providing, and I put them all in the same box. We didn't get what we needed to make it so it was mission critical. We asked them early on, would they provide priority and preemption? They said no. Understandably, the reason why is it wasn't in their shareholders' interest. That's why we were able to go to Congress to get that spectrum. Let me tell you something. It didn't work out that way, and I'm not here to challenge the procurement. There are lots of good folks at FirstNet, my friends, and others that are on the board. But I will here to tell you this. California is the largest state. We have the need. There's no question. You will drive the nation, all right, and how this thing is supposed to go. There is language specifically in the legislation to allow a state to opt out if they believe what they got from the carrier chosen partner, whoever that was, to go ahead and go your own way. It's not supposed to be easy. It has to be interoperable. Now, what you're seeing in the analysis that you folks did, which is absolutely wonderful, Pat, I couldn't say it any better. All of those things that are up there. The numbers, I think, are totally unreasonable, but that's, we don't know for sure because you can't see what the contract is. This whole the notion of everything is proprietary and the fact that you don't have any visibility into it, number one. Number two is you don't have a contractual relationship with your vendor. Let me tell you, as a major city chief in the telecommunications world, I ran the 911 center for San Jose. The fact is I had trouble enough getting vendors who I did have contracts with to do what was needed to get what we needed. And here you don't have any of that leverage at all. The only leverage you have right now for the state to do the right thing for public safety is to put out an RFP. Get the best offers on the table. Those numbers that you have here, if those are in fact true, and I would highly doubt them, quite frankly, because they're punitive. But that all said, again, I'm not here to challenge my friends at FirstNet. I'm here to say for California, the benefit of first responders here, I think the best thing to do is recommend to the government you put out an RFP. You've got lots of people. California can do it on its own. Some of these numbers look scary, but when it comes to public safety in California, it's cheap, let me tell you. Some of the numbers about penalties, I totally disagree with. When you talk about value of spectrum in a state like California, we need to lead the nation. And I speak as a 56-year resident of this state, a 31-year member of public safety in this community. I really urge you to recommend to the governor that you put out an RFP and see what you get. You have the time. You do. There are enough people that are out there thinking about it, and they'll get you some great responses. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Lastly, Mr. Reed.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rich Reed. I'm the Chief Customer Officer here at FirstNet. I want to thank you all for the review you've done of the state plan. As you know, I was responsible for developing the state plan. I was the Director of State Plans at the beginning of the FirstNet process. And I've taken the role as Chief Customer Officer. And my primary duty, in addition to delivering a comprehensive state plan, is to make sure that the customer stays at the forefront of our future decision making. So customer satisfaction and customer engagement is my responsibility. So I want to address a couple of things. I mean, one, this concept of the user figures not being accurate. The independent analysis that we've done through our consultation is that there's somewhere in the neighborhood of 335 million police, fire, and EMS, if you include all the volunteers and all the associated users that fall into the primary category. There's also another 35,000 federal primary users. So you're talking about 370, almost 400,000 users, and many of them, as I mentioned in the earlier session, are multiple device users. So there's tremendous amount of potential device connections in the state of California. In addition to the information we provided in the state plan, we also have followed up with significant responses to the questions and comments. So some of the 687 some odd questions and comments were comments, not questions, and that's why we responded with the appropriate thank you for those comments. We did our best to answer all of the critical questions that's been levied upon us by the state. And we went so far as to document it in a letter, and the letter came out Friday where we went through and answered many of the critical questions that you've stated in the earlier comments. For example, the hardening approach that we're taking has been documented in the letter. I'd like to commit to the group that our applications and our commitment to the network is for open, standards-based, non-proprietary deployment of the network. That's in the legislation. That's our mandate. That's what we're going to deliver. In addition, the LTE-based network technology is by nature interoperable. We're doing a LTE-based deployment, and therefore the communications, voice, data, and SMS texting is interoperable by its very nature. Application level of interoperability, where people are choosing to elect to leverage an application, is a very different thing. And we don't want to stifle choice We don't want to limit choice. So people who want to choose a particular application will be free to do so. But we will also offer options in terms of, for example, push to talk as a solution that can be leveraged on the network. In terms of the portal meeting the needs of stakeholders, our goal of having a portal for users is to do just that. And one of my responsibilities as Chief Customer Officer is to ensure that user engagement and that sustainability and the customer satisfaction is achieved. So our interaction with our staff will be ongoing, and our consultation and our dialogue with the users will be ongoing. So that's my commitment to you personally, is that we're going to interact and make sure that those portals meet the needs of stakeholders. As you know, the ongoing dialogue between our partner, NTIA, with LA-RICS is still ongoing. There isn't a solution, so we haven't documented what that integration looks like because those negotiations are ongoing. And frankly, there's another partner here with our federal group, NTIA, a federal agency that's responsible for helping make that decision. And that's something that we hope to achieve in near term. Deployables. We did offer the 4 deployables for the state of California, but we did do something that was very important, and we offered the ability for the state to solve their own issues through the purchasing or leasing of deployable assets that they can control. So we recognize that each state has its unique challenges in terms of deployables, and we knew it was important that the state could then deploy its own assets either through a lease with our partner or purchasing their own assets through their own third-party vendor to go solve their own problems. So we think we have a solution that really meets the majority of the state's requirements in terms of deployables. All in all, I hope that this body actually makes the recommendation to opt in. I think this is the lowest cost, least risky option for the state of California. I think we've delivered a superior coverage solution with superior capacity to anything that we theorized at the beginning of this process. We thought we were going to deliver 20 megahertz of prioritized preemptive service. And what we're delivering is many times over that in terms of the capacity, as well as the coverage that we thought we were going to be able to achieve. To reflect that, in the detailed portal where we share the coverage, we've actually highlighted the coverage objectives you provided us. We are showing you where our coverage actually overlays on top of the coverage objectives you set for us. We're very transparent in what we're delivering compared to what you ask. So anyway, thank you for your time. I hope you recommend opt-in. I think it's good for the state of California.
Thank you, sir. And Mr. Rantanen?
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Matthew Rantanen, Southern California Tribal Chairman's Association Director of Technology. And I have had the opportunity to be on one of the review teams or 2 of the review teams and seen some of the information. But publicly, from the tribal perspective of things, we've, in the 2003 fires and the 2007 fires in Southern California, we experienced exactly what's going on today, just a little ways from here. And with the lack of coverage that's being proposed in the plan, tribal coverage is 79%, I believe, at 5 years, if I'm quoting that correctly. And, the coverage for plain old telephone service is still at 70% in this country and hasn't advanced in 10 years. So for the tribal communities, so if you're proposing 79% coverage on this, is that ever going to advance? We don't see any future plan for that. We have a lot of tribal communities that are in the middle of this kind of natural disaster, and it happens a lot in these areas. We're not really supportive of something that is not looking for 100% or close to 100% of coverage for tribal lands. And interoperability, as Barry mentioned, with all the different contracts and the different coverage gaps that happen in California due to geography or just, deployed services at the moment versus deployed services in the future, we have to be able to work from, your opposing companies, like so the Verizons and the Bravadas and the different companies that are out there, and have to be able to integrate, because some of these tribal communities at 79% coverage in 5 years from now are still going to have to use those things and have to be able to work back through FirstNet from a different carrier. So these are things that are concerns for the tribal community, and I just wanted to make sure that that got on record.
Thank you, sir. Okay, we'll close public comment, and it's back to the board.
Pat, can I ask a question?
Certainly.
FirstNet referenced a letter that was delivered Friday. I'm curious, was there an additional letter that was not included in our analysis that provided additional information or clarification that would be valuable?
The letter that was delivered on Friday was the cost implications, the cost for the use of the fee, cost for use of the spectrum, the number of applications that would have to be, or not applications, but the number of subscribers that would have to be on through years 1 through 25, the cost of backing away, from years 1 through 25, as well as the penalties that would be applied if we were to not achieve the preset adoption rate. That was the letter was delivered on Friday. And it was not put into the portal. It was sent directly to us, to OES. Certainly.
We did update the portal as of last Friday. We updated the letter and we uploaded that to the portal.
Okay.
And it also talked about hardening, critical coverage, deployables. So we went through and addressed all the major questions that were before the group. I think I'm happy to discuss those.
Okay.
I'm kind of feeling like I don't have all the information again.
And as we said earlier, we would hope to be able to, given a little bit additional time, be able to consult with FirstNet on how they arrived at those numbers. I'm sure that the governor is going to want to know how a figure of $15 billion or $258 million a year, in spectrum usage, how those figures were arrived at. So obviously we have not had the time to be able to dive into that. Right. But we certainly would hope to.
So just to clarify, the NTIA letter is not in the portal.
No, he's talking about the portal was updated on Friday.
Yeah, right. The NTIA letter is the letter we're talking about. That is not in the portal. And yes. And that's the one we want to know if we can share with the board, and that's a question pending.
Well, I guess I'm trying to clarify, do we have two letters? It sounds like we have the NTI letter, and then was the original letter delivered to California that was put in the portal updated on Friday?
It was not Friday. It was earlier than that, and that is in the portal and has been in the portal for quite some time. The updated offer letter from AT&T. It was Monday of last week. That is in the portal now, and you can view it through the portal. And
yeah, that's the one where the language was changed from intent and will welcome to commit.
In a couple of places.
And will.
Just to clarify, but the updated one was sent, I think, Monday late, like 2 days ago. The one that I sent to you.
Okay.
So that one is in there.
And it's.
So I'm just trying to get a better feel if there's additional information that may be available that would be helpful to know.
Well, apparently there is, because I was not aware that we received another letter on Monday. I have not received it.
Everybody sitting here has access to the portal, but all of us missed it apparently, so that's interesting.
Well, I completed my analysis last week, and apparently I needed to check again on Monday.
That's unfortunate because there's not a message sent out that says there's been a change to the portal or where to look unless you look in the portal. So I have not seen that letter that was delivered on Monday.
Okay.
I've seen the letter. It will not sway you from what is on the slides. It does not address the bullets on this slide. But you're welcome to go read the letter.
Okay, so really the decision at this point is, do we want to make a recommendation to opt in or opt out, or do we want to defray the decision with no decision and perhaps call for a special meeting of this board in the early November timeframe?
Can I
certainly
make a statement? This is Barry Frazier. Here's where I stand on this. As we said, the review teams gave the plan probably a D. The SMEs, SAIC SMEs, maybe a little higher, maybe a C, C minus. I think we need to ask AT&T for some extra credit get that score up there to something we can actually support. So I would like to support, Pat, the idea of not making the recommendation now and perhaps scheduling a special meeting in a few weeks to revisit the issue. I think that's also a good idea because there may be information that we haven't seen that's available now. Will give us a chance to review that. I just think it's important that we make the right decision here, and I don't know that we have all the information to do that today.
And if I could piggyback on Barry's comments, I would add to that of asking for additional information to clarify some of our concerns that have been raised by our review, because I think as I listened to FirstNet's representation and discussion, it painted a slightly different picture than what our analysis came up with, and I'm curious if clarification or additional information would be helpful in closing that gap so that we can make a recommendation based on a full picture, because I want to make sure that I have the full picture. I'm concerned that, you know, we did our analysis and I find out there's an additional letter that showed up mysteriously on Monday that may or may not clarify additional details. And I think if we as a board are making a recommendation to the Director of Office of Emergency Services that's going to pass on information to the governor, I need to make sure we've done due diligence, and I need to make sure we have all the information so that we can push that information so the governor can make a sound decision for the state of California.
Point. Okay. If that is the general, Sully?
I just wanted to say to echo Scott's points, and in order to make a recommendation and an informed recommendation to the governor, I would encourage this board and the advising bodies to the governor to consider whether or not we have all of the information before us with the FirstNet and AT&T plan, or whether we should explore a request for proposal and another solution.
Okay. All right. Does somebody needs to make a motion on that, please?
I'll attempt a motion. I'll make a motion to request additional information from FirstNet and to postpone any vote on a recommendation until we have a special meeting
in November.
In November.
Second.
I'll second that.
Okay. Without, is there further discussion? And then all those in favor say aye.
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 Is there any opposed? Then we will schedule a special meeting of this board for November the 9th. It's the second Thursday of the month at 10 a.m. And please also reserve the 8 o'clock time frames. We will probably have a closed session at that time as well. Well, you can change your schedule. Okay. And we'll coordinate that. We'll actually send out a meeting bug or whatever they call it to see if we can do that. Okay, let's move on to Public Advisory Committee. Barry.
Thank you, Pat. I really don't have much of an update. We did have a webinar a few weeks ago, the PSAC. That's what we're on, right? Mm-hmm. Yes. And we got updates from our working groups. We don't currently have any task team taskings that we're actively working on right now. So that's about all I have. The next PSAC meeting will be in person. It will be in December. I believe it's the 12th of December or 11th, somewhere along in there. We'll be meeting in Atlanta, Georgia. So that's really all I have.
Thank you, sir. And last agenda item before we adjourn is the statewide interoperability coordinator in Budge.
Yeah, this is Budge Courier. I'm the statewide interoperability coordinator. I don't really have any updates as they relate to FirstNet. We've been doing many things in the SWIC world, but waiting for a decision to opt in, opt out. And the next step will be to develop the updates to the statewide communication interoperability plan that have to tie into this decision. So that's a pending action waiting on what direction is taken by this board and by the governor.
Very good, thank you. And do we have any additional public comment cards that we received? Okay, seeing none, we'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn. Second.
Okay, without objection, we're adjourned.